My Adventures with Superman was back again this week on Adult Swim with a brand new episode entitled My Interview with Superman. You know, I'm starting to see a naming convention beginning to form here, aren't you? I'm Cape Joel, and this is the video series where I give my thoughts and feelings on the episode that was, as well as shouting out any comic book Easter eggs or references I can find. So then, picking up from where last week left off, Clark had finally gained his classic costume, and now he's trying to further develop his Superman persona by saving the people of Metropolis. I like that we're so early on in Clark's superhero career, people are still genuinely surprised and amazed every time he shows up. Where, you know, most of the times in the comics it's just taken for granted that there's a bulletproof super god flying overhead at all times. It's also a pretty interesting new angle on the Superman mythos, having Clark come to Metropolis as a young man and have to kind of learn on the job as a superhero, where a lot of the time in the comics he comes to Metropolis more fully formed. Hell, in some continuities he travels to the future and trains with the Legion to explain why Superman is so good at everything right out the box. In many ways, this whole show feels like a rebuttal to that classic, well-known Kill Bill speech that people always seem to misunderstand about Superman. Oh, you know, Clark is a mask, he's a parody of how weak and stupid humanity is. Geez, it's like a murderous sociopath gives that speech or something. Here, though, in My Adventures, Clark is 100% what you see is what you get. He's a lovable southern himbo who is on a journey finding and trying to create Superman for himself. In fact, in that regard, I'm pretty sure that's why the show is called My Adventures with Superman and not just Superman, because, well, the title is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's referring to Lois and Jimmy who are adventuring with Superman. But for Clark, too, at this point, Superman is another guy he's kind of riding along with, trying to discover the truth about him and himself. And hey, speaking of Lois and this episode shows Lois continuing to dog Superman for an interview, believing that if she can get him to open up to her, it will finally allow her to achieve all of her dreams of journalistic glory. Sadly for her, though, Superman continues to dodge her at just about every turn, while Clark struggles with feeling like he's lying to the woman he so clearly has a massive crush on. This is fun for me because it totally feels like a riff on the classic Richard Donner Superman movie, wherein Superman does have an interview with Lois and he ends up totally oversharing and it kind of bites him in the ass, so it's fun to see it here be a major plot driver for the first handful of episodes. Now, at the other end of the episode, we have a major breakout on Stryker's Island. We see Kyle Mist Nimbus, along with his partner Albert Roughhouse, break out their boss Siobhan McDougal, aka Silver Banshee, with the help of some high-tech weapons that Livewire left on the streets at the end of the previous episode. As we soon learn, this trio of adorkable crooks is actually this series' answer to Intergang, a long-running criminal syndicate in the Superman comics. The group is always shown to be a little different. Sometimes they're traditional criminals in a city filled with super crime, sometimes they are actively selling weapons from Apocalypse. They also have different leaders. Sometimes it's Morgan Edge, sometimes it's Boss Moxie, sometimes it's Bruno Mannheim, hell, sometimes it's Lex Luthor. What I'm saying is I'm cool with this radical reinvention so early in the Superman timeline, to have Intergang be a group of low-level hoods looking for that one big score that will help them climb the ranks of the underworld. As far as the three members themselves go, in the comics, Mist was actually a Flash foe who could turn his body into mist. Here he can mostly just turn himself invisible, which sure isn't a bad power. His sister, Silver Banshee, is a longtime Superman foe who, when I stop and think about it, has actually been really lucky when it comes to adaptations. It's a bit of a shame she doesn't speak with an Irish accent in this show like she does in the comics, but I will say in a nice bit of costuming, her leggings have fun little skeleton bones on them, as a nice reference to her more traditional skeletal look in the comics. And as far as Roughhouse goes, he's actually a bit of a deep cut and the only one of these guys who was actually a member of the Intergang in the comics. He worked under Box Moxie, and then he got cloned by Dabney Donovan later. It was a whole thing. I noticed now that My Adventures with Superman has a real thing for creating trios to juxtapose the main cast of Clark, Lois, and Jimmy, because it's also in this episode we meet the Scoop Troop, the senior reporters for the Daily Planet, made up of Steve Lombard on sports, Cat Grant on gossip, and Ronnie Troop on the politics beat. While Cat and Steve are portrayed pretty much exactly like how they've always been in the comics, Ronnie is actually an updating of the old Ronald Troop character, a longtime Superman supporting cast member who doesn't get near as much play as he used to in the comics now that I stop and think about it. For what it's worth, Ronnie is actually the only member of the senior reporters who are actually nice to Lois, Jimmy, and Clark, which stings all the more because the troop ends up stealing their Superman byline from the last episode, and the same continues here. I gotta say, I enjoy the idea of another rival news team keeping the trio of interns on their toes and giving them some antagonists who aren't aren't straight-up supervillains. Naturally, none of these setbacks are going to stop Lois from tracking down her Superman story. If anything, this only makes her more dedicated to getting that interview, much to Clark's dismay. This is why he tries to send the team to look for these striker escapees instead to keep them busy. This situation once again gives Lois the opportunity to show off her creativity and gumption by swiping the Scoop Troop's press ID so that they can infiltrate the prison and look for clues. This is probably the funniest joke in the episode too, with Lois pretending to be Kat, Jimmy pretending to be Ronnie, and Clark very sadly and defeatedly having to be Steve. Also, hey, in a fun reference, the warden's name is Ellis, which I'm certain has to be a reference to famous embattled comic writer Warren Ellis. Together, Clark and his friends are able to uncover that Silver Banshee and Intergang plan to use an experimental ice cannon to knock over the biggest bank in Metropolis. A heist that they hope will take them from failure convenience store bandits to actual real-deal criminal movers and shakers. Granted, that's a bit of an uphill battle because even they don't seem to understand the new tech they're using. It's around here too we get the big twist of the episode, and that is that Lois only agreed with Clark's plan to chase down this Intergang story because she hoped the bad guys would take her and Jimmy hostage, forcing Superman to swoop on in and save them, which in turn would give her yet another chance to interview him. And wow, I gotta say, that's actually a super clever twist on a classic Superman story convention wherein Lois and Jimmy are seemingly always getting kidnapped or finding themselves in harm's way. Only here, it's Lois actually showing a certain level of cunning. She's not a damsel in distress, she's putting herself in dangerous situations on purpose to further her career, you see. Which does actually track with the comic Lois counterpart. She would be willing to do anything and risk anything for a story, even her own safety. Superman ends up joining the fray to deal with Intergang, and we get a cool little action scene wherein Superman once again gets to show off his powers, or should I say the powers that he's unlocked so far. Again, in my last video I had at least 2 people complain that Superman is just too weak in this show, which is a complaint that I do not understand for multiple reasons. One, this is literally Superman's first week on the job, he only just got the costume. 2, we see that he's actively been repressing his powers long into adulthood after almost losing Ma and Pa as a kid. And 3, this show is so very clearly obviously playing by anime rules and not traditional comic book rules, by which I mean, of course throughout the run of the show Superman is going to unlock all of his most classic skills and abilities, he's just going to do so when it's the most dramatic for the story. Case in point, like when Intergang's ice cannon ends up malfunctioning and threatening the whole city. Only then can Superman dig deep and unlock access to his iconic heat vision, which he uses to end the threat. And also in a twist I'm sure most of you already saw coming, turns out the ice cannon was powered by another one of those strange crystals that when Clark touches them he gets visions, maybe of the future, maybe of the past, it's hard to tell. This also basically all but confirms my theory I had in the last video, and that is that My Adventures with Superman is doing the whole Ultimate Spider-Man thing, where instead of having multiple villains of the week get their own little origin stories to explain their superpowers, instead crystal tech is now the reason behind all of the villains' powers, which from a writing standpoint, yeah, that's probably going to make things a lot easier moving forward. Intergang is defeated, but before they can be carted away by the police, they end up getting captured by Deathstroke, much in the same way Livewire did in the previous episode. Geez, what could they be doing? Maybe building some sort of Suicide Squad? I mean, Jimmy did make an offhand comment about prison super soldiers, and I think that's going to be a running gag moving forward too, and that is like every other thing Jimmy says is a conspiracy theory will ultimately be revealed to be true. With the day saved, Superman is actually finally able to give Lois that interview that she's been after this whole time. The only problem is he can't actually answer any of her questions in depth because in reality he doesn't know where his powers come from. He doesn't know what makes him tick. He's still trying to figure that out for himself, and that's kind of the thrust of the show. If nothing else though, Clark hoped that this interview would finally get Lois off his tail and placate her just a little bit, only it ends up having the exact opposite effect. Lois is certain that Superman is lying to her, and now she vows to uncover the truth in her ever-ongoing journalistic quest. And so that was my interview with Superman, another fun, funny, and ultimately really charming episode of TV. This new Superman series is certainly going places, and I'm happy to see the response that my last video had. I've been saying that there was a real hunger out there for years amongst the fan base for a show like this, and getting to see so many people really accept it and really enjoy it warms my heart and makes me hope that this show will be around for a while. Heck, as I learned from people in the comments section, the reason Adult Swim gave this show the time slot that it did is apparently a lot of their shows geared toward all ages and teen audiences actually do better on Adult Swim later, which hopefully means this show won't join the graveyard of series that Cartoon Network canceled prematurely before their time. And so that'll just about do it for me, everyone. everyone, thank you so much for watching and listening to the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will be back again next week with more Superman.